We're continuing in our series in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and thinking about it this week, and we hit some chapters, and there's kind of, if you've ever read the New Testament, if you've ever read the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, there's all kinds of numbers and verses in there, and this one is going to span across 2 chapters, not 2 whole chapters, but I always think about that because if you're newer to this, you're kind of like, well, why, you shouldn't end at the chapter, are we going into the next chapter? But we kind of versified things later. So we're gonna go across 2 chapters, but we're gonna start in chapter 2. And I was thinking a lot about, what it means to really love the church and love people, and often how people feel, we're going to see a lot about how much Paul really cares for the church. And I think it speaks to how we should feel about others and care for them. And so in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, starting in verse 17, Paul writes, "Dear brothers and sisters, after we were separated from you for a little while, though our hearts never left you, we tried very hard to come back because of our intense longing to see you again." And after we were separated from you, and it's interesting, the word that's used there for separated, it was kind of interesting that it's Mother's Day. It's actually the word we get for to be orphaned. It's sort of this image is sort of torn away from a parent or a child. And so Paul, he wasn't trying to leave Thessaloniki. It's just hard to say. He wasn't trying to leave, but if you know the story, they'd come to Thessaloniki, and they preach there, and then they do things, but then they get driven out of the city. And so he's not trying to leave them, but he kind of gets unjustly accused of treason against Caesar because, they're going around saying Jesus is Lord, and they're like, no, Caesar is Lord. And they get pushed out, and they kind of sneak Paul away. And so this image we have is like a mother or a father torn from their kids. And again, it's appropriate for Mother's Day because I think all of us, I'm not a mother, again, but I'm a father, and you think of what it would be like to kind of be torn away from your children. And that's the kind of love Paul has for the church. They're sort of his spiritual children in a sense. And if you've ever been away from someone you love, it's difficult, right? Like I miss my wife and kids when I'm away, or they're away. I miss Josh when he's away. We had this long road trip home. Some of you have seen some of the pictures we posted online or some of the stories involved, and some of you didn't get there were a lot of bad dietary decisions on this trip because that's what road trips are. And if you've ever had Crystal burgers, anyone not have Crystals? Yeah, we figured out we were doing about 46 miles per steamer because 46.3 was the approximation. But it's kind of the road trip home. It's like people are like, some people just don't get road trips, but it's like it was sort of exciting. And we made a really bad decision. Well, we made a series of bad decisions, but the first decision was probably what we were eating, which was terrible food, and it's greasy, but it gets you there. And we decided to kind of, just drive through the night. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but I'm too old for that. I need to stop that. But it kind of, because time was just flying as we caught up. Because there's something that, when you're in the presence of someone is different than being separated from them. And so it was a great time. And you can imagine what life was like before even phone and texting. Now we're kind of all attached to our phones, and it's, we're used to it. And imagine how hard it would be, because you didn't know how they were. And it was forced because of these riots, and Paul had to leave. So he's kind of wondering, what's going on? And it says in verse 18, "We wanted very much to come to you, and I, Paul, tried again and again, but Satan prevented us." And, it's kind of funny. Does anyone else see pictures in their head when they read stuff? Okay, it's not just me. Sort of the image I have is because we always picture Satan as like a giant red being with like a forked tail and a pitchfork and horns. I don't know what your image is. That's sort of what I picture. And it's like, is there a giant red demon standing in front of the road, like Paul's trying to get by, and he's like, "No, you can't get by," like a defensive player or something. I don't know. But really, it's really more likely, probably not that literally, but there's obstacles placed in their way. And obstacles can prevent you from doing things. There's a burrito place I really want to try that's on the way to BWI. And so every time I go to the airport, I try to time it with getting a burrito. And just this time it was going to work out. It was the perfect timing. We left early, and then we hit traffic cones and construction. And I didn't get my burrito, because there was like a barrier in the way. It's things that kind of slow you down. And I'm sure that was Satan, by the way, because I want that burrito. And it's a TikTok. I was on TikTok. I saw it and I was like, that's near me. I got to stop there. And we all want to be in better shape, but there's also tacos and burritos. So anyway, and so it's sort of there's something obstacle in the way, or you kind of think of like an adversary. Sometimes I've been through TSA where you're like, are they just trying to prevent me from being on a plane? Like they're just like they yell at you because you didn't have this done or that done. It's gotten better, but back in the day when they first implemented the stricter things, it was definitely a challenging thing. And so a commentator said, Paul does not attribute to Satan every obstacle in the way of his plans. And however, at a number of points in his writings, Paul reflects on the conflict with Satan, the adversary. And I was thinking about what keeps us from stuff. And number one is sometimes it's just not the plan or timing of God. There's some things that won't happen because it's not God's timing for it. There's an old saying, if God closes a door, he opens a window. So maybe there's another opportunity. And, I think sometimes God directs our timing because it's not the best thing for us in that moment. And that's hard because we want what we want. Anyone else? But it may not be God's timing for that. And so not every obstacle in your way is something to push out of the way, because maybe it's God doing something. And then I always say number two is physics. And that's because I was a chemistry physics guy, and I think of things, and I don't know if you think about, like if something falls and breaks, you could be mad, but that's physics. We need the laws of physics to operate, and we try to use those to our advantage. And so sometimes just natural circumstances. So an alternative to the old saying is, if a door closes, open it. That's how doors work. Because sometimes just things happen, and you can kind of move things, and sometimes it's a no, because that's just how the world works, right? Like there's times if we don't change the oil in our engine and our car breaks down, it's probably not Satan. It's bad decisions. Anyone else ever make a bad decision? Okay. If you live up in the Northeast, snow may change your plans. Like there's things and it's not like Satan brings a snowstorm. I mean, Satan maybe could. I don't know how in charge of the weather he is. He doesn't have a weatherinator or something. But, I saw somebody sent me, some of you send me funny videos all the time because I don't spend enough time on my phone watching funny videos. I appreciate you sending me more, because then I watch that and I watched like 10 after anyone else. The phone is like, it just sucks your life. But there was one, and someone sent me, a pastor was trying to do an example of something. I don't know the original context, but they had like those giant jaw bear traps, and he was going to use a stick to kind of put it, but instead he sticks his hand in there to trip it and pull out. And I don't think from the video that it cuts off, but he did not make it out. Here's the thing, I'm not going to use a bear trap as an example today and stick my hand in it, because if I get injured in that, whose fault is it? It's Jeff's. That's not a Satan thing. That's physics. And, if you are 100 men and decide to fight a gorilla, don't blame God, because if you don't know that, that's a crazy. Someone told me about it on the internet, and there's dudes who are convinced they can beat a gorilla by themselves without 100 men. Some of you are like, this is crazy. It is. But men. You put 100 men together, one of them thinks they could take the gorilla on their own, or maybe two. I don't know. That's not. You don't need Satan. Don't blame God for that. That's just your bad decisions. But we do have an adversary, and often there are supernatural circumstances. So I would say, alternative saying would be, if a door closes, pray. Because there's doors, sometimes there is an adversary. Jesus said in John 10:10, I come to have life and have it to the full. But, the first part of that is a thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. And there is an adversary in life that doesn't want things to go well, doesn't want you to do God's will. And so our job is really with anything that's sort of a roadblock in our life is to discern. One, is it God saying it's not the plan or timing? Because not everything is, sometimes God's stopping us because it's not time for us yet to do something. We want things now. Anyone else impatient? The microwave is just too much time. I want a macrowave. Is it just natural circumstances? Because sometimes things happen because that's life and decisions we've made, and there's repercussions to those decisions. Or is this the adversary? And so I think all of us kind of naturally go to one of the other of those, but it really can be, anything can be one of those things. And so we have to be discerning and prayerful about maybe a roadblock that God has in our way. Is it for a reason? Verse 19 says, after all, what gives us hope and joy, and what will be our proud reward and crown as we stand before our Lord Jesus when he returns? It is you. Yes, you are our pride and joy. And you kind of picture a crown. We get medals, at the Olympics or, I don't know. How many of you have won the Olympics? No, I'm kidding. No, I haven't either. But, it's, you get you go to like a wrestling tournament or something, or you power lift, or you run, or you, I don't know. Do you get them for photography? Do you get like a medal? You get a ribbon. So that's kind of what we picture. It's like you get some sort of reward. Back in the day, the Roman days, you get often some sort of it's like a greenery or flower crown. Picture Coachella, Firefly, whatever you want. But I picture Little Caesar's pizza because he's got that little thing on his head. Anyone? Do they still use that mascot? That's kind of what I picture in my head. I still go pizza though. Because, those of us in the 80s and 90s, they gave you 2 pizzas whenever you bought one. It was pizza. It was a beautiful thing. But there's, and it's sort of the thing, it was this reward for kind of doing things. And so Paul is saying, hey, reward for faithfulness, he considered them his prize, his crown, and he's promised a reward ultimately when we are faithful. And so Paul has this love and affection for the church at Thessaloniki. And so verse 1 says, starting in verse 1, finally, when we could stand it no longer, it's all I can stand. I can't stand no more. Anyways, we decided to stay alone in Athens, and we sent Timothy to visit you. He's our brother and God's co-worker in proclaiming the good news of Christ. We sent him to strengthen you and to encourage you in your faith. They couldn't stand it any longer. Again, you imagine this world without texting, or phones or telegraphs. It's agonizing, kind of not what's going on. It's like if your phone dies, I think, for younger people. What if you didn't have your phone? Everyone panicked for a minute. Anyone else, you leave your phone at your house now and you turn around to get it? Like in my day, we didn't even have a phone. I was going to get a car part, and I realized I didn't have my phone. And I'm only going 2 miles from the house, but there was a nervousness. I'm like, what if I need my phone? What if I can't find the part in the store? What am I going to look it up on? I have to look it up on my phone, right? Anyway, I got through it. I made it. And you kind of picture no phones, no light, no motor cars. And there's this it's agonizing if you don't know how a loved one is. If you've ever been in that situation where maybe you don't have cell phone reception thing, and we always laugh, Denise and I laugh, because sometimes I've traveled for missions things, and we get so used to connection here that we forget what it's like around the world. And I remember one time we kept losing the internet. It had to do with government stability and different things. And so I get a text after several days of not having any contact with her, and she's like, if you're not dead, I guess I'll see you on Saturday. Because we can laugh about it, right? Because ultimately, because we have a hope in Jesus, and we believe I was doing what God was calling me to do, and if we died, we died. But it's just a couple of days, and it was we kind of knew probably fine. But you kind of picture Paul. Paul had been on this trip, and it was sort of a rough time in Thessaloniki. And so then he goes on. They start to have a good time in Berea, ministry-wise. Things are going. Then people come and drive him out again. He's having a rough time. Then he goes to Athens. There's really only like a few, converts. So he probably just wanted to know, hey, how are they doing? Like it's been a while now. He's concerned about the church, and so eventually they just send Timothy. Now I don't know why they sort of send Timothy. But they do, and it really kind of goes back to this parable of the sower. And we're reading Mark 4, where there's a sower and the seed, and Jesus teaches that the word of God is spread like seed, and this is like the springtime. Some of us are planting lawns. My neighbor's planting grass, and my grass not so good. My grass is whatever will grow. I say it's for pollinators. It's just because I don't want to do the work of a lawn either. But you spread out the seed, and if it falls on a hard path, it just gets eaten up by birds. If you spread your seed on pavement, nothing's growing. And if rocky ground, it might sprout, but if it's not good soil, it doesn't grow. And that's part of our Christmas trees. It's like there's this my grandfather had a driveway there with burned coal remains, and you try to dig or plant anything there, it does not work well. And then there's thorny ground. It symbolizes it starts to sprout, but the weeds kind of choke it out. My yard is choking out everything. And then good soil, it symbolizes the people who hear the message and they accept it, and it grows. They apply it to their lives, and there's growth. And that's what Paul is looking and hoping for, but he's kind of concerned about the weeds, the thorns, and all the things that might have happened since he's not there to hear. And so they send back Timothy, and I ponder these things, like, why can they send back Timothy? Does anyone else think, like, was he okay? Was he expendable? Well, let's send Timothy. If it doesn't go well, we've just lost Tim. Timmy, poor Timmy. No, but probably wasn't as well known. Maybe he could slip back in. He was half Greek, half Jewish, so he might have been able to kind of hang out and not get persecuted. And then, and he just goes back to strengthen and encourage and really to teach them, right? And he wants to encourage them in Christ and give them direction. And I was thinking about, it was a lot like work projects yesterday. Some of you didn't know we had a work day. But we turned on the lights in the nursery last week, and they didn't work. So we had to have a work day on Saturday. And it was just some lighting fixtures out and everything. And so a couple of us just stayed after the men's group, and we're like replacing lights and all that kind of stuff. And but it's always interesting when we do like any sort of a work day like that, because there's people of varying levels of knowledge and ability. Right? And there's some of us who, I remember when I started out, I didn't know anything. Like I had a shocking good time several times before, if it doesn't kill you, you learn. And I'm not dead yet. but it's like my ability to do projects has definitely grown. I remember my kids one time, they're like, where did you learn to do all this stuff? I'm like, I don't even know anymore. And it's like, it's like some of you know Bob, and I'm working with Bob. I learn a lot because he's an actual someone who knows what they're doing. And it's like, but there's all the kind of different levels of knowledge whenever we're working on a project here. And there's some people who are just like carrying the supplies, but we try to teach, right? Like you're learning to use nail guns, you're learning to do stuff, and really that's, there's different people with different knowledge levels, and we all learn where we have knowledge. It's fun sometimes with Bob, and because generally Bob knows much more about construction than I do, but it was great when we're like chainsawing, because then it's my expertise, and like, okay, finally a place like I feel like, I know what I'm doing now. But and it's really the experienced guys encourage the less experienced guys to learn, and we can girls too. We'll teach anyone to wire things and fix things, and but it's this mentoring process, and so he's sending Timothy not just to find out how they're doing, but really to invest in them. And maybe it was a risk for Timothy, but you know what? It was a calculated risk because he loved them. He was concerned about him. And so they send Timothy. And this is the kind of stuff, again, I think when I'm doing that. Like, how long did it take to get there? Because, today you could just hop a flight. You could get in a car, you could drive. I don't know, maybe it would take us, driving from Memphis to here was a long drive for us. It would have taken it was about 220 miles overland. Would have taken 10 to 11 days. And so if he stayed there at least a week, I mean, you're talking, he's probably gone a month or more even. You know, we tend to think of things as like minutes and quick, and but it's this long journey. It's this investment of time. And so he comes back, and then he reports, and he says this, verse 3, he says, and to keep you from being shaken by the troubles you were going through, but you know that we were destined for such troubles. Even while we were with you, we warned you that troubles would soon come, and they did, as you well know. That is why, when I could bear it no longer, I sent Timothy to find out whether your faith was still strong. I was afraid that the tempter had gotten the best of you, and that our work had been useless. You know, there are hard times in faith. And I think we have these conversations sometimes at home. We're talking about things, and you have the pastoral stuff, and not talking about you. We're talking just the things that people face. And I think some believers think that, like, it's all got to be easy. And you feel like if you're hitting a hard time, then, like, you've done something wrong. But the truth is, now, there is this, we do live in victory, there's hope, but we all go through hard things. Like, life can be very difficult. 1 Peter 4 says this, it says, Peter says, don't be surprised at the fiery trials that you're going through, as if something strange were happening to you. I love that line. Instead, be very glad, for these trials make you partners with Christ in his suffering, so that you will have the wonderful joy of seeing his glory when it is revealed to all the world. Don't be surprised at fiery trials. You know, later Peter will say, you know, watch out for a great enemy, the devil. He prowls like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. We have this enemy that wants to destroy us, and so we should expect attacks. Now, I've never been in the military. Some of you were in the military. You know, it's like if you were a soldier, though, I imagine, and you signed up, and you're in the middle of war, and it would be weird to have a guy run back and go, they're shooting at us. Like, yeah, because it's war. It's what we expect. But that's really what we are. Is we are in this struggle. We're in this war against an enemy that really wants to do us harm and damage. And sometimes I think because we're not aware of, or, you know, because in America it's easy to sort of go, well, they talked about Satan, but I don't know if it's a real thing, or, you know, we kind of discount it. And then other people are like, they think about nothing but Satan, like, and everything's, but sometimes we kind of discount that. But there is a real enemy that wants our faith to stumble, that wants us to sin, wants us to go in the wrong direction. And we often go through hard things in life, but ultimately we have this hope. We have this hope in Jesus because we eventually get to go home. You know, the Bible records a history of persecution for not worshiping other gods. There's a story, you know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or, you know, the VeggieTale version, Rack, Shack, and Benny, which is probably, and it's a literal fiery trial. And I always think of this every time, you know, I think of persecution and martyrs being burned, because every time I'm working on the wood stove, like, our wood stove gets so hot it burns the hair off my arms when I'm loading it, and sometimes it'll burn my hair. You're like, there's not much to burn, I know, but like, I'll lean down and I'll do something, and it's like I'm like, oh, my hair won't comb anymore because it melted together, because it's so hot when you're dealing with a wood stove. Because it heats the whole house for us. It's so, you know, you think about it, and like, they literally get a fiery trial in Daniel 3. They won't worship the king, and they're like, hey, our Lord will protect us, but if not, and they get thrown into the furnace. And if you read the story, it's like, then there's like 4 people in the furnace, you know, because God's with them in the fire. And, you know, we often sing, there's a song, you know, he's the 4th man in the fire time after time. You ever hear that line? Did you get the reference, though? That's the reference. It's this biblical idea that God will be with us even in our fiery trials. And that's the difference everyone's going to go through hard stuff. But when you believe in Jesus, when you have faith, when you're on God's team, God's with us. He's our 4th man in the fire. And you know, and God will save us. And if not, but if not. And there's a story, you know, but if not, is a sort of this poignant phrase, and because ultimately it's like, you're resolved to, I'm going to serve God no matter what comes out of this. And there was this, in the summer of 1940, and there was actually a movie on this, like Dunkirk, and there was 350,000 soldiers, most of them British, were trapped at Dunkirk, and the German forces were on their way, and it just sort of seemed like completely lost. And a British naval officer cabled back 3 words to London: "But if not." And it's like, God's with us, but if not, there's this. And so these words were instantly recognizable to people who were accustomed to hearing the scriptures and read church. They knew this was from the book of Daniel, and the story of those 3 little words was clear. The situation was desperate. The Allied forces were trapped, and it would take a miracle to save them, but they were determined not to give in. And so there's this belief, this hope that God will be with us even in the hard times. And if not, we still serve him. Life isn't easier as a Christian. But Christians should suffer less for stupid things. Sometimes people are like, there's a reason for everything. And sometimes the reason is you make really bad decisions. But trusting in ourselves shifts to trusting in Jesus. And so Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 say, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. And so there is this, when we put our faith and trust in Jesus, we should trust in God's wisdom. We should look for his direction. So in some ways, it should get easier. Like, when you're a believer and follower of Jesus, there's things that change in your life so that you're not doing some of the stupid things we do. I don't have to name them all, but you can probably think of some knuckleheaded things you did that you shouldn't have done. That when you come to Christ, there's certain behaviors and patterns of things that we put away, and so we'll suffer less. But Christians should suffer less for stupid things as we learn to trust them, but we will still suffer for Jesus things. Life isn't easier as a Christian. Sometimes it becomes more complicated, but it's also much more purposeful, much more hopeful, even during trials. Our hope is that God will be with us and work through it, no matter what we go through. If you read the book of Acts, the apostles were persecuted, and it says they called in the apostles and had them flogged. And, we just say flogged, and we're like not thinking, they were flogged. Not a good thing. Like you're whipped and bleeding. It's not just a word you read. It's like this is a painful experience. They order them never to speak in the name of Jesus, and then they leave, and they leave rejoicing that God had counted them worthy to suffer disgrace in the name of Jesus. Most of us, if we got flogged, we're not leaving rejoicing, going, I got to suffer for Jesus. We're like, we're so concerned about the suffering. And now I hope no one goes and gets flogged today. It's not something we're encouraging. But when trials come because of our faith, we can be glad that we're on the team. And so we follow this crucified Messiah, and so it shouldn't surprise us when hard things happen to us. Jesus said, pick up your cross. James, the brother of Jesus, said it this way: dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Most of us don't go, oh boy, troubles, great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. The testing of our faith can cause the faith of some to choke out. It's hard. There's weeds and things. But the testing of our faith can also cause our faith to grow. I think it's been a couple months since Heath was here, and some of you know Heath. He was a missionary in Indonesia, and then they came back here, and he was telling the story of this mango tree in his yard. If you weren't here that week, and he basically talks about in Indonesia the weather was rough. It was like hot. I mean, we all I think most of us think living on a tropical island sounds like a really good idea, right? But, I guess the weather was really hot and hard, and it was just like you spend your time inside in the air conditioning if you can. And he had this mango tree in the yard, and it just produced the sweetest, best mangoes. But it took hot, hard weather to produce that sweetest fruit. And in our lives, often the hard things that we go through, the persecutions we endure, they create the most growth and the sweetest fruit in our lives But most of us would choose not to go through hard things if given the choice. But the hard things create good stuff for us. It's kind of like pottery. Now, if you were to go to my house and you were like, what's your favorite cereal? Lucky Charms, Fruity Pebbles. I can think of a lot of things that I shouldn't eat that I want to eat. It's Mother's Day, so I give you permission to eat them. If you were to come over to my house for cereal, because that's about all I'm going to cook for you anyway. Maybe some scrapple on a good day. I took a big chunk of clay and pounded it out, made a bowl, and put your Fruit Loops or whatever in there and poured the milk in. Would you be like, yum? That would be disgusting, right? It would taste like clay cereal. You're like, this is a very bad idea. But you take that same piece of clay and you put it in the fiery oven of a kiln and you bring it out at the right time, and what do you have? A great big cereal bowl. And that's our life. Sometimes we have to go through the hard, fiery things because God will use that to shape us, and He'll use it for His purposes. And so the hard things are things that we go through for our betterment. His suffering was for our salvation. Your suffering is not for salvation, but God will still use it. And we can expect to suffer when we follow a suffering Messiah. Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me. 2 Corinthians 4 says it this way, starting verse 17. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long, yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So don't look at all the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will be soon gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. The ESV calls these, our troubles are light and momentary. Or the King James, our light affliction, which is but for a moment. Our high school coaches, if anyone played sports, I think every coach in the 80s and 90s, I think they said, pain is temporary. They usually say pride is forever. And I'm like, and so are the injuries I got in high school sports. But the idea is that you work hard and endure for a prize, right? Because, you go through hard things for something that's good later. It's somewhat true. I assure you, I have many pains from the sports. But, it's true for sports, how much more for eternal things? We go through hard things in this life, but they're temporary. Ultimately, we have this hope beyond this world. And Paul's concern was, because he left the church when he was young and small and had no mature leadership, it would have been easy for the Thessalonians to just kind of pack it up and go, this has been hard, no thank you. But Paul then is excited to hear that they're continuing in their faith. And in verse 6 says, but now Timothy has just returned. I don't know, I kind of wondered, did he wait till as soon as he heard from Timothy? Or was he writing this and maybe Timothy showed up in the middle of it? I don't know. You can picture it how you want. Bringing us good news about your faith and love. He reports that you always remember our visit with joy and that you want to see us as much as we want to see you. So we have been greatly encouraged in the midst of our troubles and suffering, dear brothers and sisters, because you have remained strong in your faith. It gives us new life to know that you are standing firm in the Lord. And so Paul's encouraged by the faith of the Thessalonians because it was growing and multiplying, and because ultimately they were standing firm in the faith. And it's again, I think life is a lot like a road trip. Josh and I sort of took this road trip this week because we wanted to bring him home for the summer, and there were good and bad decisions with food, mostly. Very bad decisions that are, but there were very good decisions that were very bad, or very bad decisions that tasted very good. Again, we got 46.3 Crystal Burgers per mile, in case you were wondering. But there was just all kinds of things that happened. I won't go through all the stories. There were good and bad. There were bad decisions. We decided to drive all night. That was a bad decision. But in the end, what was hopeful was that we got we ultimately got home. And there's a book that the men's group has been working through slowly. We thought it was going to be a couple of weeks, but it's like we're the better part of the year. We're still going through this book. It's Long Obedience in the Same Direction, Discipleship in an Instant Society by Eugene Peterson, and there was something we read this week that I thought fit here well. Perseverance does not mean perfection. It means that we keep going. We do not quit when we find out that we are not yet mature and there's a long journey still before us. Because life is like a road trip. We had lots of setbacks and obstacles on ours, and I'll tell you some funny stories and some scary stories. We had to make some unintended rest stops for things like a nap at a truck stop, but ultimately we made it home. I mean, we could have just quit. I could have lived at a truck stop in Tennessee because Tennessee is a really long state. Like 40 goes right through it. It's a long, long thing. It could have stayed there, but the journey home was worth it, right? Even though it was hard. There were some challenges. There were some times I wondered if we were going to make it home. But ultimately we get home, and I think life is like that. And Paul feared the Thessalonians' faith might be shaken by the trials. And we all face these trials and difficulties in our faith, but we need to stay anchored during those seasons, which is why it's important to invest in your faith, to spend time growing, spend time in his word, be connected in a community, and ultimately serve one another. Paul calls, kind of a challenge I was thinking about, Paul calls the Thessalonians his hope, joy, and crown of boasting. If you're mature in the faith, in whom are you investing like Paul invested in them? Or if you need to grow to maturity, who's investing in you? If you need someone, connect with us. We have some opportunities and things we'd love to help you grow in your faith